Hi, this is Andrew Sears with City Vision University and the nonprofit COVID-19 course. And today I'm going to be interviewing John Savage, and he's going to be presenting not only on how do you fundraise in the COVID-19 era, but how do you overall lead your organization during this time. So John has been in development for 30 years, and he's been consulting for about 25 years. He was involved in some of City Vision's first courses and both developing those and serving as faculty, and has now moved on to his own development consulting practice. And I've asked him to share some of his advice for organizations. So John, could you just give a little more of your background? And if you want to start sharing screens, sharing your screen now, you can. But thank you, John, for sharing some of your experience during this time, because I know one of the things that a lot of nonprofits are thinking about right now is how do you continue to fundraise in this environment, and how do you support your staff and sustain your organization? So you want to go ahead and share your screen?
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks, Andrew. Great to be with you and your team. And we'll sharing what I'm calling the culture of COVID. And it speaks to this time in history where things are different than we're used to. And yet we have to get up every day. We have to respond to our call, personally, organizationally, missionally. And so how shall we, think, live and lead our ministries amidst what I'm calling uncertainty. And part of that, comes to me from in my history. I was influenced by Francis Schaeffer and had the content of how shall we then live. And so I'm always thinking about that in the context of our culture and our day and our history and situations. But you've asked me to give a little bit of story in terms of how I got to where I am. And, I had the chance to go to college and really had this call to ministry, but not exactly seminary. Back then, kind of pastoral path was the path. I was really interested in improving the quality of life in the third world, Latin America. I'd lived there when I was a child a bit and just loved the culture and the people. And back then, they were trying to make them all Americans. That was the path, make them all like the Westerners. And so culture, I think, is really important in our geography and our ministry, and it's just something that's been of interest to me. But as I went and tried to pursue that, I wanted to serve God and I wanted to live joyfully, but wanted to, make a difference in the world, as many of us do who are in ministry today, or church leadership, pastoral leadership. But that God didn't open up those paths. I started in marketplace ministry, doing commercial lending, some investment banking, some charitable trust work, and involved in lots of volunteer engagement. Oversaw the construction of an orphanage in Mexico for a couple of years, kind of trying to tend to my interest in Latin America. But a friend of mine, mentor, came up and said, "Hey, why don't you do work in nonprofit?" And I was like, "Well, what is that? How does that work?" This was in the mid-'80s. Back before some of you were even born, I suppose. But that led to becoming founding director of Plan Giving at LA Mission, downtown Los Angeles, and my exposure to Skid Row. And then recruited a few years later to oversee all development and public affairs at Union Rescue Mission, which then was the largest in the country, about 1 million meals a year. And I think today may still be the largest in terms of services. And under the leadership there, Randy Bales, it's doing quite a few things. And so it was really a privilege for me to learn. And what, in our discussion on fundraising, as we will touch on pieces of that today, just giving you this story and background for me and the things that shaped my thinking and my living. And yeah, at Union Rescue Mission, my role really evolved into becoming a broker, what I call a broker between the rich and the poor. And we find in Scripture that God calls us to serve the poor. And I've come to see that it's not because, quote unquote, those poor people need our help, but He wants us in relationship with the poor for our own sake. And there is poverty in all of us in various ways that the Lord seeks to resolve. And when the rich and the poor, materially and spiritually, come together, all needs are met in the context of Acts 4. So needs and resources come together. And so we just saw amazing things of famous TV actors from Hollywood that came down to tour our mission who were in tears because they found themselves in the face of the poor and the eyes of God that showed up there. So everyone's got their own path. Mine happened to be among urban ministry, urban poverty, and a bit of this work over the border. When we built the orphanage, we found the same thing, that we were purposed and excited that these orphans would someday have a place to live. And yet what we found in the process is that we were ministering to our donors, to our volunteers, for the joy set before them, if you will. Their lives were being changed while serving and preparing, building this orphanage. We really didn't even have any orphans at the time. But the context for ministry that all of you on this, listening to this, watching this, all of you have a context for ministry that's focused on your mission, your vision, whatever it is that God's called you to do. But what we find as a byproduct of that, in some sense, is that there's ministry opportunity to everyone in your circle, including board members, including donors, including staff. And lives are changed as a result of that. And so it's very interesting to me how God really, purposes us to live in community and not by ourselves on some island. The kind of the Western view of get wealthy by an island and be by myself is not how God intended. He wrote the New Testament for us in community, and for the church of your city. And it's the same thing for your ministry, for your church, that it's really that community where lives are changed and people are a part of it. And even if they're connected through direct mail and you never meet them face to face, although I hope that if possible you do, and they meet you. But if that doesn't happen, there's still ways to minister, and all the folks that help make that possible find ways to message and give experiences to people that draw them closer to the Lord. So I learned a whole lot in my path that resulted in a commitment to help multiple ministries. And so when we moved to Seattle to raise our kids, from California to Seattle to raise our kids with the grandparents there, we launched the consulting practice and have had a great opportunity and experience just serving lots of ministries in stewardship and leadership. And so for many folks, they come to us, perhaps even you came today in the context of this webinar to learn about how to fill the financial gap, how to raise more money. And that's a very practical element. And there's a stewardship theology and philosophy that surrounds that. But there's also the leadership side for those of you in any leadership position at all. If you have any responsibility for other people or budgets, or hope to someday, there's real need to understand how you engage with people, how you help them relate to you, how you help them relate to money, and how they relate to their God. And so all of these are opportunities for you to pastor and minister others, really regardless of your role. So we've been working with boards, ministry CEOs, senior pastors, executive teams, revenue teams in particular, with this focus on donor engagement. How do we engage donors in ways that are, meaningful for them? So hope that path and my own personal history is helpful to speak to where we are today. So I want to start with this idea of the COVID paradigm. Now, how do we live and lead when most of the assumptions, have changed? And I think we all agree on that. I don't know when you are watching this today, what we have learned since this is recorded in terms of what our future may hold for us, and what uncertainty still remains. But I think this is still going to be relevant for us. So part of my purpose here is to help us rethink, maybe, or even step back just and think, versus doing and acting, which the demands of your ministry may well be pressing you 7 days a week right now, because you happen to have some tie to the needs of those impacted by COVID. But what was our paradigm? I think, did you ever really stop and think about what it was? What defined how we thought and acted from a day-to-day basis? How did we behave under the assumptions that shaped our paradigm? And I see lots of posters or signs in front of churches right now that says, faith over fear and things like that, which of course is a framework we should embrace. But I think some of us had behavior that was based on money that was coming in or not coming in, ministry that was working or was not working. So many of those assumptions that shape that really are temporal assumptions anyway. And I think times would suggest that we maintain, or that we ask this question, but can we maintain the same behavior under a different set of assumptions? And I know early on in this, for me personally, and even to a degree today, I'm trying to live my my normal life of days gone by, and I just can't. Maybe you can. I am experiencing certain elements of fatigue via this online experience. My personal life and work is driven on being face to face with clients and their donors on location in various cities, traveling a lot as relates to everything in my own world really shut down. I can't do what I have done historically, or anybody on our team, because our model was to be with you and to grow with you. And so I'm not able to live my same life under the current circumstances. I need more sleep. I'm more tired because I'm in front of the screen so much. I'm not even walking from terminal to terminal in an airport in terms of exercise. I've had to be very intentional in getting exercise, which I was not good at anyway. So that may be a positive. But the point is here, I think, is that we need to agree that we're in a new reality for some window of time, even if it's today and tomorrow. And we think about, okay, how do we map that out? How do we step back and say, okay, what were the old assumptions? What are the new assumptions for today? And we'll talk a little bit later about assumptions for the future. But until we step back and consider that, how our leadership is really driven that. So as Andrew and I have been talking, this question is, do we have an assumption that our current scenario or paradigm is temporary? So not that long ago, we were all saying, well, when we get back to normal and everything, we just got to get through this. And I think day by day, most of us would agree that we're not going to see the normal we once knew. And I'm qualm a little bit with the phrase of a new normal. I think even that's not an applicable term. And so this may be temporary, or it may be a longer temporary than we expect. There may be a sense of permanence to this. And this interim period, shall we say. So these are questions, obviously, for you to shape your thinking. So what new assumptions can we form to carry us from where we were to where we are to where we will be? And if you're in any position of leadership, as we'll visit here in a few minutes, this is a question you have to answer for yourself, and others are looking to you for that answer. And so even if you frame assumptions for a week, this week, this is how we're going to live, communicate, behave, then it's still a sense of adaptation, but they're following your leadership and saying, okay, these are the assumptions we're going to operate. Now, these assumptions may be wrong, things may not work smoothly. You may be operating your ministry, all aspects and things are not smooth. That's a possibility. But if you give a certainty in your leadership around the assumptions we're going to live by, at least for this week, that will give your folks real help in how they're supposed to behave. So how does that impact our planning horizon? How long is it? A week of time frame? Is it a month? Is it a day? And the systems that relate to that in the team. So even our systems and how we normally delivered on our ministry, if we're in a shelter, or while working with our donors and our donor base, a lot of things may change. I went to the post office the other day for a simple mailing. It took me an hour. Well, how long it takes you to do things you used to do, may be different. So again, these are just some questions that we're encouraging you to work through. Happy to debrief offline too and help you think through some of these things, but that's a thought.
John, I'm just going to jump in here now. We've talked with probably over 100 ministries, since COVID hit.
Right.
And part of what I found this surprising is the radically different assumptions that the ministries have in this. And I think part of what's important, I mean, no one, people really love to say no one really knows what the future is going to be. Well, that's somewhat true, but if you have assumptions that are more wrong than others, and that could really hurt your organization. And how do you have assumptions that are helpful? How do you have a paradigm that's helpful in this? As Christians, I think, we believe in hope, but at the same time, we also believe in, reality. And how do
Right.
you have both of those? And in recognizing that different organizations in different contexts, different parts of the country, and depending on who they're serving, I've talked with a good number of nonprofits that their fundraising outlook is dramatically higher, and then others that this is going to be catastrophic for them. But writing out what some of these assumptions are, and then as the scenario changes, um, changing those assumptions. So I think that that's something that can be important. So I just wanted to throw in my 2 cents there, but yeah, this is really helpful stuff. So
What we'll reference a little later on, really appreciate you bringing that up, is places like City Vision University and elsewhere can provide a community of peers to help get objectivity on this. I think this environment is harder than most to figure this out on our own. And so while there's I don't want to say spirit of isolation, but this, framework of isolation, it's more important than ever to find ways to be in community with others outside of our core operation, so that we can get perspective and make better decisions. You're right. It's a critical time.
Yeah. Thanks. So I look forward to seeing the rest of your material.
So how do we live and lead when most of these assumptions have changed? So, leadership assumes we're in relationship with others. Again, we're gonna touch on a lot of many aspects of your leadership in terms of who you touch and who you work with, including your donors. But for whatever team you're leading, step back and consider the relationships you have at work, at home, through extended family, church, neighborhood, beyond. It's very interesting for some 90+% of us. The work life and home life now is pretty blurred if we're working from home. And I've talked to a couple people that are able to commute to work for various reasons, or they are on the front lines, and some people are living, and one client of ours, their core staff is living at the mission. They're there 24/7 for an indefinite period while they're caring for their folks, and but the separations are the line is thin. So here's a suggestion as we move into this: is as you step back to visually map out what I call your conversational chart. Most of us in leadership have this function of the organizational chart. We have a piece of paper with boxes on it or some graphic that says, oh, this is how my work life relates. And it's interesting, years ago I did an org chart for our home. And our family is very simple. There was like the CFO and the COO, and there's the program office. I mean, all the same functions are there at home as they are at work. But the reality is that even though we like to think our life is neatly organized in an org chart of relationships and delegation paths and all that it's not. That there's the conversational chart, which is the real path of our day-to-day living in terms of the conversations we have with people who interrupt us, who are calling the phone, or we see by the water cooler historically, all of these informal relationships that actually do take our time and our mind space in conversation. So here's the point, that there are people who have expectations of us, who are following us formally or informally. They're looking to us for how we are dealing with all this, or they're looking for specific direction, if that's the case. And there are those who we have some expectations of, maybe who lead us. Maybe it's our pastor at our church, or somebody at home, or maybe you are that person too. But even if we're in a position of leadership, there's somebody that we have expectations from and that we're following. So the point here is to kind of step back and think about these relationships. And frankly, in a time like this, we're going to have to prioritize our relationships. Who are we going to invest in, pour into, care for, and let's say a primary tier and a secondary and tertiary tier? Because the reality is we probably can't get to everybody. Everyone I know of, probably true for you too, is busier than ever in this time of having nothing to do. I'm in a peer group of board consultants, and we all started out early on with somebody had the subject line of the email said the unintended sabbatical. And we started to have this dialogue. Well, how are we going to spend all this free time? And we'll finish the book and we'll do this. Well, within about a week, that was flipped on its edge. And many of us have been, working 16, 18-hour plus days with demands for a variety of reasons. So anyway, what I'm suggesting is that you shape a plan for how you're going to live out each day, and fundamentally recognizing that that's driven by relationships, our relationship to God, our neighbor, ourselves, our great commandment in there. How are we going to live that out? Now, that's an interesting and valuable discussion under quote unquote normal times, pre-COVID times, just in terms of living our life intentionally for the Lord. And now we have a microcosm where we have to reshape, replan, reprioritize those relationships based on what we can and cannot do, what limitations we have. I had a Zoom call with my daughter yesterday. It's delightful, but I haven't seen her in 6 weeks. We live in the same area, Seattle area, but just limitations on what's possible and whatnot. Just think about giving yourself some structure and some parameters for all these relationships. Of those that you have expectations from, have a conversation with them, what you maybe need or want, and for all of those that are looking to you and have implied or formal expectations. So again, what I'm seeing is we're more fatigued, less productive in an online world than in an on-site world. And we need to adjust our expectations of ourselves and others as we adapt and embrace these new realities. I'm not there yet. I'll just tell you, I've identified it. I have self-awareness, but reworking my work day. Just like maybe 3 days ago, I began to give myself permission to get done only what I could get done in my day, given I need more sleep, there's more fatigue, and needing to rework some things. And so God and I are talking that through and, giving him permission to be God while I play my role here. So just trying to encourage you, of course, in this dialogue, as Andrew has suggested, to give yourself space in this reality to lead as best you can. But it all obviously implies a prioritization. You can't be all things to all people, especially now. So for the ministry leader in an organizational context, there are these implications, complexities, profound in a normal sense. So being intentional and proactive on how you're going to serve others and define that. Think it through, map it out, develop a rhythm and a plan. Now, some are more visual than others. And so I have this resource. They're called Big Post-it Notes. I just discovered them about a month ago. You may have known about them before, but they don't fit on your desk. These are 15 by 15. You put them on the wall. And I've got about 18 up right now. So I like to look at things. I like to write them out. I like to plan them out. I can move them around. And that may or may not work for you. But whatever tool you can use to get to a place where you can take everything in your heart, your mind, put it on paper and give it some prioritization, I think will give you some structure to live, day by day.
Yeah, John, let me jump in with another suggestion of a resource people might be able to utilize. There's a book that was written called The Way We're Working Isn't Working. And what his big tip really is that, so much of productivity is focused on managing time.
Right.
But he says that we should be focused on managing our energy. Now, I think that in general is a good idea. And the idea is, rather than blocking out your whole day of, okay, you're going to optimize your, 8, 10, or however many hours that you're working. He says you should be focused on how do you optimize your energy. And one of the things that, I've noticed and what that got me doing is I took more and longer breaks in my work just in general. But people's energy is getting tapped because, it's basically like if all you ate was steak for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, even if you like steak, you're going to get tired of steak. And that's what's happening with our time right now. We're on a computer or
Right.
we're in, Zoom meetings, and that's, it's like steak every meal, right?
Yep.
So, we have to have more variety to manage our energy. So I'd encourage people, look at a book like that and then start to prioritize your life according to energy, meaning take breaks whenever you need them. And, one of the other universals I've seen is that during COVID, people are working longer hours, but they're taking more breaks, the people who find good balance.
Yeah.
So, instead of having an 8-hour day, you might have a 10-hour day with two, 1-hour breaks built into it. And I've encouraged our staff to do the same type of thing. And, honestly, I would rather our staff do a 6-hour day and take 1-hour breaks and be productive for those 6 hours, because
Yep.
a couple of weeks ago, I got to the end of the week, and even though I was working my full day, I was at like 20% productivity because I was brain dead, and
Right.
I've been taking more breaks, getting a lot more done. So I think that those type of principles are a lot more important during this time. So.
Amen. Well, we're going to touch on that in a bit. But one of the things that became evident to me early on was that everybody wanted to jump on the bandwagon about how to survive and prosper during COVID. And so there are more webinar invitations than I think I can count on, how to get through this, and valuable content, across the board, generally speaking. Everyone has an opinion on, how to get through this and what the chapter should look like, and you want to start, thinking about that too. But what I came to see was people were getting deluged with data, with input, with ideas, with all this, but there really wasn't a place to process them. And so even for our company, we thought we've got a great team of people who could speak into this, and we should do webinars and tell people how to get through it, like everyone else is doing. And we chose not to do that because there was enough to choose from. We didn't need to create another offering, but we did design and now offer a place to process. And so initially, I think now more than ever, I'm saying we have to be selective about our inputs, the quality and quantity, and how we want them to help influence or shape our outputs, which in leadership at least are the decisions and the subsequent actions from those decisions. So, obviously starting a bit with the end in mind and saying, well, what are the actions we want and the decisions we need to make to embrace those actions, and what data do I need to that? So the work increasingly is creating the filters to keep the data out that's not going to help you. There's a lot of interesting things. I'm the type of person who's interested broadly, and lots of things I'd love to read on, and I get notifications, about this and that, and I have to be disciplined in saying, well, it's interesting, but it's not relevant to the decisions I need to make, the actions I need to take, so I'm not going to go there. And lots of, again, inviting content that's really interesting providers, whatnot. I register for a number of webinars. I do about 10% of the ones I register for. Sorry about that. But so this general idea, particularly now, is I say that if our inputs exceed our outputs, then our downfall will be effectively the quality of our decisions. That most of us, even under quote unquote pre-COVID normal conditions, have just too much input. And our technology and our world allows for that. So there's lots of choices, lots of upsides to this internet environment, if you will. But for the leader, you really need to be disciplined in choosing the inputs you want. And that includes not just technology inputs, but people in your family, people at the office. Who are the people that really speak in your life, speak truth and love in ways that are helpful, and who are those that don't, and creating some boundaries and parameters for yourself around that. So I'm encouraging you to find a space and a place to process those inputs, preferably among a community of peers who can help us see what we cannot see ourselves. And I was on faculty for City Vision for a number of years, and we had the opportunity for the folks who took those courses to actually engage with them either individually, one-on-one, or as a group. And some of their assignments, often required that engagement. So City Vision has lots of choices for that. We've got some choices, but somewhere, either create or find something that exists so you can process a lot of those. And knowing you, Andrew, you probably have a comment on that.
Sorry, I was muted. Yeah, I think that what you're saying is basically expanding more on what I was saying. Is you have to have a good balance. And what sitting at a computer does is it gives you lots of information, right? It's good at giving you lots of information, but there's a lot of other things you need in your diet, right? So
Well said.
making sure that
Yep.
you have a balanced diet, I think that's really important. So this is really helpful, kind of reflective. How do you make it through this time? So yeah, thanks.
Yeah, again, I think as we move towards kind of finishing up here, just the idea that particularly in a leadership role, that as you model self-care, that will trickle down to others. And if the organization doesn't have you, there's not going to be an organization. So let's talk about self-care. How do we care for ourselves while caring for others? And somewhat by definition, all of you watching this are in the business of caring for others directly or indirectly, part of an organization that's purpose for that. And so just acknowledging the tremendous pressure on you as a leader of a department, as a leader of an organization, as a leader in a church, maybe even a volunteer leader as an elder in a church, whatever it might be, people are kind of expecting that by de facto you're a leader, so you know the way and you're going to show us the way. And my side comment is that Jesus came to raise us all up, and John 14:10 says we're going to do everything he did and even more, and he's kind of wanting us to do that. But some of us wait on others to do it or to tell us what to do. And in times like this, we've got to find our own way some of the time when we can't connect with the leader. But if we are a leader, then we have this pressure and responsibility. So given the fact that we chose to be in a ministry, it means that we're purposed to love God and to serve others. It's the DNA of most everyone I meet in ministry. That's why they're in ministry versus investment banking like I was. We're wired to pour ourselves out in service of others in response to really some of our own motives. Might have been some pain in our childhood we're trying to resolve. We don't want anyone else to have what we had, so we've got a ministry now that's preventative or helpful or compassionate. We've been called to something that gives us joy. That's my definition of passion, the things that give us joy. And so I know folks that are on the front lines. One of our client ministries working with the homeless, they're really maxed out, but they are happier than ever. They're just like thrilled that they're able to reach so many people on the front lines, as well as the volunteers that are involved. There's just a lot of ministry going on that COVID has surfaced that was kind of quiet before. So pain, passion, or purpose is that legacy piece of getting clarity about what God has called us to, what he made us for. You're like, oh yeah, that's what my life's journey was all about. And so these are motives that I've found, top 3 motives that drive us to do what we do in service to others. And so whatever you're doing today and tomorrow is probably in response to one of those 3, directly or indirectly. But you can't keep doing that unless you are restored and refilled. So as I say here, a water pitcher once emptied must be refilled if it's to refresh others. Many of you, I'm going to venture, are on the borderline of fatigue or exhaustion, mentally, physically, spiritually, whatever the case might be. So we really, really need to be attentive to this, particularly if we are responsible for the people in leadership, and get restored, get refreshed in the way that serves us. And my years of ministry have found that not everybody is restored and refreshed in the same way. We'll come to a retreat and get refreshed, your mind, soul, spirit. And now more than ever, your body too. Get up and move around and exercise, because that's not happening for most of us sitting in front of a screen. But what I recognize is the same, a given retreat doesn't serve everybody. And so for you, it may be connecting with God's creation. It may be in the Word in your bedroom. whatever it is, or if you don't know, ask God to show you the best way to get replenished and get restored, renew your mind, restore your soul, re-engage your spirit and you accordingly. At the core of whatever you're about is you. So we need to make sure that you're well cared for. So find space and a place to intentionally fill your reservoir on a regular basis. Find ways to maybe even measure how that's going. How might you measure your mind, your soul, your spirit, your body, your health in those areas? It's another discussion, but if you don't have a way to evaluate it, you won't know. And so if we weren't clear on this and not committed to this self-care, you'd certainly benefit, again, from a person, peer, or community of peers that would help us see and act in a manner of self-renewal. These interesting times, everyone within the church and outside the church is looking to figure this out. And so if we as the body of Christ can role model this and live it in a way that obviously point others to Jesus, it's going to be a big win all around. So create some goals, some practices around each of these that really help you, work for you. And maybe now and then post about that if you're a posting person. I'm not particularly, but if you are, you might share what's working as an encouragement to others.
Yeah, John, this is great. And, one of the phrases I've been hearing people talk about is how whenever you're on an airplane, they always tell you if the oxygen goes out, then you're supposed to put on your own mask before you put on the mask of your children. And I think the same thing applies to the work that we do and the ministry that we do. If we're exhausted and not doing our self-care, then we're not going to be ministering. And, early on with COVID-19, I said the biggest risk to nonprofits is going to be financial. I'm now revising that. I think that the biggest risk is going to be, it's going to be staff burnout. And, we may lead and get amazing results, but once this is all said and done, we may have, several key staff members quit, several key staff members, their families are affected, or they take up new addictions, because of the stress, and some of it may not be, the stronger addictions like drugs or alcohol. In some cases, I've seen, people relapse from these type of things, but it might be, other things of, food or games or things like that. And I think that we need to be making sure that we are leading by example.
Yeah. Well, I love Andrew has this gift for word pictures and analogies. So yes, put that mask on yourself first so that you can help others and whatever that mask might be. But, in preparing for this discussion with all of you today, so many things that came to mind and that I wanted to talk about. And City Vision has done a great job in creating resources to help, and this is meant to complement the others that are already solid, particularly in the fundraising area. What I would say, digressing a little bit to Andrew's point, is the engagement relationally with your donors on the financial piece needs to be amped up more than ever. They actually, if you've cultivated them well, they actually love you, care for you, want your best outcome. They're standing in the wings, ready to help if they can. I saw an interesting survey about people said, how much time do you have and how impacted will you be by COVID? 17% said this won't impact us at all financially. I was astounded at that figure, much higher than I expected. So I don't know your donor base, but you have some people out there who are doing fine and are not impacted by this right now, at least financially, and care about you, and they want to help, and they may just be waiting for you to express that. At the same time, they have their own challenges, and you may well be able to bring something to them and care for them, whether it's just a prayer over the phone or something in particular. I'm participating by Zoom in a memorial service on Saturday. And just trying to be of support to people, and people, you can still care, and people still feel cared for when you reach out. Just as a side note, with another client, Andrew and I talked about this before we we went on live with you guys, the idea of connecting with people on a regular basis, and what I'm going to suggest is through different mediums. So what I encourage one of our clients to do is to make a phone call once a day, at least, among other responsibilities. Make a phone call to a donor and or write a note card, surface mail a card. Some of you remember there used to be surface mail postcards. But I think what's going to be really help you be noticed in this environment is different mediums. So the electronic medium is what people have too easily and too much of. If you can do something outside the electronic medium, send a postcard with a stamp, a note, a card, words of encouragement, some scripture, make the phone call, do things other than the electronic, or in addition to that, if you will. That's really going to help, because we all need to feel cared for. So feel free to send me a postcard. I'll gladly receive it. So again, just encourage you to care for yourself and then model that for others. Well, let's just finish up here and talk about the leadership confidence. Again, wherever you might find yourself in leadership, whether it's at home or at the office or in your department, there is some element, certainly within organizations, where the leader just does a little alone among an abundance of relationships. So we're all alone together, right? Ministry leadership often finds you at the center of most of these work groups and communities. So if you're the executive director, senior pastor, you typically will have a board, you'll have executive staff, and you'll have other teams, as well as your constituents and the broader staff and the parishioners and the donors and frontline service. A lot of people in your world, back to our conversational chart that you're going to map out on your big Post-it notes. So you're getting input and you're in dialogue with a lot of people, but you can't always process that input from those teams, without bias. And that's true under non-COVID and any COVID. And so a lot of good people, the best teams are those, where you do have people that will speak the truth in love and will hear the truth in love, including you. Are you teachable? If so, then your teams probably serve you well. But objectivity is enhanced when you can have access to a coach or community or someone outside of the circle. Once you've gotten maybe your final round of clarity and decision making. And again, these peer groups like City Vision offers, and we offer, a really great place to get that objectivity. So your confidence, you think about, how do I feel about my leadership amidst COVID? You're asking that question. Other people are asking that question. And your confidence is enhanced when you have some ability to evaluate your decisions and the outcome of those. So you make a decision and things happen, downstream. Was it a good decision? Was it not? Are you a good decision maker? That's a core element of leadership, is decision making. Are you a good decision maker? If you're not a good decision maker, your leadership will certainly be impaired. And it is a skill you can learn. But as I note here, a good decision is far more than positive polling from your constituents. That's certainly something that politicians and others pay attention to, but it's not, it's not really the core issue. The core issue is whether these decisions advance your daily mission while moving you closer to fulfilling your future vision. Are you further along, towards your vision? And what have you done? A whole other discussion, but what have you done in assessing mission and vision in light of COVID? For some of you, it's solidified all the more. For others, you are forced to pivot, or you've chosen to pivot wisely. But still within a general framework of your DNA and why you exist, why God called you into existence. As a side note, one of my mentors, you may have heard of management guru Peter Drucker, who said, if your organization did not exist today, would there be a reason to start it? And COVID is certainly calling into question relevancy. And your donors are asking the question of relevancy. Are you relevant today? People are hardly talking about the future, other than maybe next week is the future. But assessing your relevancy amidst COVID and amidst your founding vision and mission, if you will, it's really helpful to re-articulate for yourself and for your constituents, yes, we're relevant, and here's why. Or we've pivoted within our core DNA and to be relevant, and here's why. So Andrew talked about the concerns of funding and support, and assuming the resources may be available in one form or another, they'll line up when you are relevant to the need of the day. And so I think that's enough said on it. You can go do your homework on it, and the City Vision courses will help you with that. But in my comment here about helping you move towards being confident as a leader, having a way to evaluate your decision making and tie your decisions to forward movement on mission and vision will help you feel better about your leadership and is a data point of reference for others as well. So how does that happen? You know, in essence, that could be a long discussion as well. But as I like to say, it's not who you're leading, but who's leading you, you know, that anchors your clarity, confidence, and consistent completion or execution of your mission and fulfillment of your vision. So all of us need to be teachable. All of us need to have someone leading us in our leadership, in our life, whatever that might be. And leaders are often the most frequent category of people not to have someone helping them on that journey. So I hope you do. I hope you'll consider that. I hope you'll plug into City Vision and, you know, in other places in that regard. Well, I just want to kind of recap what we talked about today and have another dialogue with Andrew on this, but just looking at how do you live and lead when most of the assumptions defined in the paradigm have changed. So I'd encourage you to go back to that slide and look at some of those questions and dig in a little bit. How are you going to think and make decisions that others depend on when you have this plethora of data, more than we can use or need? And how do you care for yourself as the core, so that you can care for others and that your mission and ministry will still be around because you're around? And then where can you go to have these confidential exchanges, test your ideas, and gain confidence in your own leadership, encouraging you to find a place, you know, to do that. In my summary, you know, reminder here, we're all in the business of hope for our ministry, for our team, for the world. Now in this COVID dynamic, we really can think in terms of the world and for ourselves. So you need to be hopeful. You need to have hope. You need to find hope for yourself, for your ministry, for your future. Probably that's not going to happen by yourself in isolation, given the theme of COVID. So find ways to connect with others, break through, build community, find place and space to grow and preserve yourself and prosper in accordance to whatever God's called you to do. That's what we'd love to see.
Thank you, John. This has been really helpful, and you know, I think that providing advice to leaders during this time is extremely helpful. John, could you just share a little bit more about what the Savage Group does? I know you guys do development consulting and fundraising consulting, but I know you also provide you know, support beyond that. Could you share a little bit of what you do?
Yeah, thanks for asking. You know, as I've been on this journey myself, just seeing myself as a subject of God's work and trying to shape me into a leader that he wants for all of us, I've learned a few things. And so we've created a framework to help other people who are on a journey. All of our clients are organizations that kind of hire us, but we're basically helping individuals who are leading, either at the board level. We do a lot of work in board development and consultation because the board is the leading indicator of the future of the organization. Take a look at the board and you'll see where the organization will be 5 years out. It is a leading indicator. Second is the CEO, senior pastor, executive leader, helping them grow in all the challenges. Most of the people we work with never, you know, grew up as a kid saying, when I grow up, I want to part the Red Sea. God brought them into this ministry that they're leading now. They've most never planned on it. But he shaped them and prepared them for it accordingly. So we help leaders grow as leaders. And then we work with the revenue function of the teams in donor engagement, helping them develop a biblical foundation for stewardship, how to relate to donors, how to build programs. All of those three tie together to build capacity to do more of whatever they're called to do. And so there's practical projects as well as long-term relationships. And because we go deep and wide with our clients, we tend to be engaged for about 3 years. We also offer our Hope 2020 leadership cohorts for groups of 12 leaders from different places to come together virtually and to grow through a 12-week intensive on getting through COVID and designing their next chapter, how they're going to actually live that out. So that's been pretty exciting for us too. And both of those are available for folks that we'd love to help.
That's great. And John, if people wanted to connect with you to follow up with more information, is the website just thesavagegroup.org, or what's the website address?
Yeah, it's johnsavagegroup.org.
Okay.
We couldn't get the other. It belongs to a rap musician.
That's not you. I thought that was you.
Yeah. My
That was,
wannabe.
yeah, right.
So
your other
until we
business.
get that, that's where we are. But johnsavagegroup.com and /Hope 2020 for our leadership cohorts. And I'm happy to take any questions on the content here by email, john@johnsavagegroup.com.
Yeah, well, I would encourage people who are listening to this, take a look at the website. And, you know, if the type of advice, kind of the executive coaching advice, you know, you find that helpful, I know that these groups provide, you know, more of that, but even more important, I think, is a peer community. And I think there's great benefit with that. So John, thank you for taking out the time, and really appreciate it as we're all trying to figure out, you know, how do we best adapt in this new environment. So thanks a lot.
Great to be with you all. Thank you.